This is Tales and Whispers, where every story is felt, not just heard.
Okay, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you are about to step into a room, and you know, deep down in your gut, that walking out of this room again, it might actually be impossible. And the really chilling part here is, it's not because anyone is forcing you to stay. You aren't being held against your will, no way. It is entirely because you made a dangerous, unbreakable promise to yourself, a promise you absolutely refuse to back down from. So today, in this explainer, we're diving into a deeply powerful story. It's going to force us to really examine the nature of perseverance, ambition, and, well, that exact point where sheer determination crosses the line into self-destruction. We're going to explore the profound, real-world consequences of pushing past the absolute limit, all drawn from a single tragic event that literally changed an entire global industry overnight.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to go back to a very specific day, November 13th, 1982. Just try to set the scene in your mind. We're at the legendary Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. The lights are blinding, the tension in the air is so thick you could cut it with a knife, and the stakes, they literally couldn't be higher. This is for the world lightweight title. In one corner, we've got the incredibly determined South Korean challenger, Duk Koo, and in the other, the fierce American champion, Mancini. Now, just days before stepping into that ring, Duk Koo made his mindset chillingly clear. He actually said, "Either he dies or I die." He even wrote down the phrase, "live or die." Guys, this wasn't just your typical pre-fight trash talk. He had locked himself into this intense psychological contract where failure or simply walking away was completely off the table. He'd already sealed the exits in his own mind.
And this perfectly illustrates the internal war that happens when we're pushed to our absolute limits. When the bell rang on that November night, the ensuing rounds just began to eat away at both fighters. But as the fight dragged on, it kind of transformed, right? It went from a mere physical battle of boxing skill into this continuous, agonizing test of human decision-making. Every single round became a brutal multiple-choice question. Do you continue or do you stop? Do you stand firm or do you gracefully bow out? And maybe the most important question, do you listen to your body, which is absolutely screaming at you in pain, or do you listen to the roaring, demanding crowd? Well, Duk Koo made his choice. He absolutely refused to fall. He refused to look weak, and he refused to let this dream he'd chased for so long slip through his fingers, literally no matter what his body was telling him.
This tragic dedication, it played out devastatingly fast. The fight actually reached the 14th round. I mean, just imagine the sheer exhaustion at that point. And then right about 19 seconds into that round, everything changed forever. Duk Koo fell. The referee stepped in and immediately stopped the bout. But the true horror of the situation was really just beginning. Mere minutes after the fight was called, Kim collapsed completely and slipped into a coma. He was rushed to the hospital where doctors performed emergency surgery to remove a blood clot in his brain. But the damage from ignoring those bodily limits, it was just too severe. 5 days later, on November 18th, 1982, Duk Koo was pronounced dead. That dangerous promise he made to himself, it had been fulfilled in just the most devastating way possible.
But the thing is, the tragedy didn't just stay confined to the canvas of that boxing ring. The ripple effect of this single event, which remember was driven by an unyielding refusal to stop, was just utterly heartbreaking. First, obviously, came the loss of Duk Koo himself. But then, the absolute devastation extended to his family. His mother, who was entirely unable to cope with the sudden loss of her son, ended her own life just months later. And it still didn't stop there. The referee of that match, Richard Green, this was a man tasked with the basically impossible job of judging a fighter's limit. He reportedly lived under a crushing weight of guilt, pressure, and nightmares after the bout. And tragically, in 1983, he too ended his own life. It's just staggering to think about. One man's refusal to stop initiated this huge cascade of grief that ended up consuming multiple lives.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the profound moral question it forces us to confront. When the news of this extended tragedy broke, the entire world kind of had to stop and take a really hard look in the mirror. Society was forced to ask an incredibly uncomfortable question. What exactly are we paying for a fleeting moment of entertainment? Like, is the spectacle of extreme human endurance actually worth the ultimate price? This wasn't just a sports story anymore, you see. It became a global conversation about ethics, about human limits, and about the systems that encourage us to push way beyond the point of no return. The public outcry was massive, and the industry finally realized they couldn't just look the other way anymore.
And that brings us to this massive systemic shift, which is represented by this single, incredibly vital number, 12.
The entire sport of boxing was fundamentally changed by what happened to Kim Duk Koo. The World Boxing Council, or WBC, realized that human physiology simply could not sustain the 15-round wars of the past, so they took immediate action. In December of 1982, they announced a massive, sweeping rule change. Starting in January of 1983, all championship title fights were reduced from a grueling 15 rounds down to a strict maximum of 12 rounds. Think about that. They literally legislated a boundary into the sport to protect the fighters from their own dangerous, unyielding ambition.
So the absolute crucial point for us here is how we take this historical tragedy and actually apply its wisdom to our own lives today. I mean, we grow up constantly hearing that we should, never give up, but the wisdom that echoes from this story redefines a very important word for us. True courage is not blindly persevering until you're completely, irreversibly broken. Not at all. Real, profound courage is knowing exactly when to stop. It takes an immense amount of bravery to look at a dream, a project, or a goal and say, you know what, this is costing me way too much and I have the strength to walk away.
So how do we practically apply this to the reality of our everyday lives? Well, it's actually incredibly straightforward. Before you enter into any massive challenge, whether that's launching a new business, starting a demanding career path, or even jumping into a complex relationship, you absolutely must establish clear, non-negotiable boundaries before the bell rings. You need a boundary for your health. I will not let this destroy my physical or mental well-being. You need a boundary for your dignity. I will not compromise my core values or my self-respect. And you need a boundary for your time. I'm only going to give this a certain number of years before I pivot. Setting these limits when your mind is clear, that prevents you from making fatal, highly emotional decisions when you're exhausted in the 14th round of your own personal struggles.
And hey, when you are deep in the middle of that challenge, when you're exhausted and the crowd is roaring, or maybe just when the pressure is mounting at work or in your personal life, I really want you to pause. Just stop. You need to honestly ask yourself, what do I actually gain if I continue? Validate that potential reward, sure, but then you must ruthlessly ask yourself the second question, what do I lose if I continue? Is the gain really worth the potential cost to your health, your family, or your sanity? This mid-struggle audit, guys, it's the ultimate survival tool. It forces you to listen to your body and your logic, rather than just getting swept up in the blind momentum of the fight.
Ultimately, achieving this level of clarity requires a massive shift in how we actually view ourselves. You have to decouple your personal value from the final result. You need to tie your self-worth to making the right decision at the right time, rather than just blindly securing the final outcome. If you walk away from a venture because it was straight up destroying your health, that is not a failure. Let me repeat that. That is not a failure. That is a deeply successful, incredibly wise decision. Your value as a human being is not dictated by whether you win the belt or cross the finish line first. It's dictated by your wisdom, your boundaries, and your ability to preserve yourself for the things that truly matter.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. I want you to really think about this for a second. In your life right now, what is the thing you are treating as a must-win at absolutely any cost? What's the challenge where you've secretly told yourself, live or die, I have to achieve this, even though deep down you know you desperately need to pause for a moment and recalibrate those boundaries? Please don't wait until the 14th round to find out the cost is too high. Have the courage to draw your lines today. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you some structured, powerful insights to think about. Take care of yourselves and make absolutely sure you know when to step out of the ring.